You ever notice how, in a group setting, there's always that one person who doesn't jump in right away? They're there, they're listening, they nod at the right moments, maybe they smile when something's funny, but they don't rush to speak. They don't interrupt, they don't try to steer the conversation. And somehow, hours later, you realize they were present the whole time without ever really participating. Maybe that person is you. You're at a party, a meeting, a family dinner, a group chat. Everyone else is talking, reacting, posting, arguing, sharing opinions at full volume, and you're just watching, taking it in. Not because you're bored, not because you're shy, but because something in you prefers to observe first. And if you've ever wondered, why am I like this? Or if you've ever been curious about that quiet person in the corner who seems oddly comfortable not being center stage, there's more psychology going on here than people realize. People who observe more than they participate aren't all the same. In fact, they can be motivated by very different inner worlds. Some are protecting their energy. Some are gathering information. Some are quietly rebelling against social expectations. And some are playing a much longer game than anyone notices. Let's talk about what's really happening beneath the surface, because this isn't just about being quiet. It's about how certain minds move through the world. Let's start with a familiar scene. You're sitting in a group conversation. Someone tells a story that's only half true. Another person confidently shares an opinion you don't fully agree with. You could jump in. You even know what you'd say, but you don't. You pause. You listen. You file it away. This is the first type, the strategic observer. These are people who don't speak until they understand the room. They're not silent because they lack opinions. They're silent because they're collecting context. Strategic observers tend to think in layers. They're tracking tone, power dynamics, contradictions, unspoken rules. While others are busy expressing themselves, the observer is quietly asking, what's really going on here? Psychologically, this often comes from a heightened sensitivity to social nuance, not anxiety, awareness. Their brains are wired to notice patterns, inconsistencies, emotional undercurrents. Speaking too soon feels inefficient, even risky. Why reveal your position before you know where everyone else stands? For this type, participation is a move, not a reflex. You might recognize yourself if you often think things like, let me hear how this plays out first, or I'll decide later if this is worth engaging in. You don't need to be heard immediately. You'd rather be accurate than loud. And here's the irony. People often underestimate you. They assume you're disengaged, when in reality, you're 10 steps ahead. Then there's another profile, one that feels quieter on the outside, but louder on the inside. Picture someone scrolling through a group chat, messages flying, jokes, opinions, reactions stacking up. They read each one, they laugh, they think, they even type responses, and then delete them. This is the reflective processor. These people experience life internally first. Their thoughts need time to settle before they feel real enough to share. Participation feels rushed. Observation feels natural. Psychologically, reflective processors have a strong inner dialogue. They're constantly refining their thoughts, turning them over, asking, do I really mean this? Speaking prematurely feels like betraying the complexity of what's happening inside. So they wait. They'd rather say one thing that feels true than 10 things that feel half-formed. If this is you, you may have been told you're hard to read or too quiet, especially in fast-paced environments. But in one-on-one conversations, or when given time to articulate yourself, people are often surprised by the depth you bring. You're not disengaged, you're incubating. And then there's a type that's often misunderstood as passive, but is anything but. Imagine someone who shows up to social events, work meetings, even relationships, but stays just slightly on the edge. They don't overshare. They don't volunteer personal details. They don't fully step into the spotlight. This is the self-protective observer. For them, observing more than participating is about boundaries. Psychologically, this pattern often forms when someone has learned, consciously or not, that visibility can be costly. Maybe past experiences taught them that speaking up led to judgment, misinterpretation, or emotional exhaustion, so they developed a quieter way of being. Observation becomes a shield. By staying slightly removed, they maintain control over how much of themselves is exposed. They choose when and how to engage, rather than being pulled into constant performance. If you relate to this, you might notice that you open up selectively.
You can be deeply present, deeply empathetic, but only with people who feel safe. In larger or more unpredictable settings, you can serve yourself. This isn't fear, it's discernment. And interestingly, people like this often form very deep connections, but with very few individuals. Now let's talk about a type that feels almost philosophical. Have you ever met someone who seems oddly calm in chaotic social environments? They don't rush to react, they don't chase attention, they seem content simply witnessing what's happening. This is the contemplative observer. These people experience life almost like a documentary. They find meaning in watching interactions unfold. They enjoy noticing human behavior, contradictions, small emotional shifts. Participation isn't necessary for them to feel involved. Psychologically, contemplative observers often derive fulfillment from understanding rather than influencing. They're less driven by validation and more driven by insight. You might hear this type say things like, "I like to just take it all in," or "I don't need to be part of everything," and they genuinely mean it. In a world that constantly pushes expression, post your thoughts, share your feelings, react now, this stance is quietly radical. It's a form of resistance against the pressure to always perform. And then there's one more type that deserves attention, because it's often mistaken for indifference. Picture someone who rarely jumps into conversations, but when they do, the room shifts. Their comments land. People listen. Things change. This is the selective participant. These individuals don't observe because they have nothing to contribute. They observe because they're waiting for the right moment. Psychologically, this comes from a strong sense of intentionality. They value impact over frequency. Speaking all the time dilutes meaning. Speaking rarely concentrates it. If this resonates, you might find that you're silent during small talk, but fully engaged during meaningful discussions. You don't feel compelled to fill silence. You're comfortable letting moments breathe. And when you finally speak, it's because you feel it matters. Now, here's the twist. In modern culture, participation is often equated with engagement. Loudness is mistaken for confidence. Visibility is treated as value. But observing more than participating isn't a flaw. It's a different orientation toward the world. In fact, many observers possess traits that are increasingly rare: patience, depth, self-awareness, emotional regulation. They're less reactive, less impulsive, less consumed by the need to be seen. That doesn't mean they're better. It means they're different. Of course, there can be a shadow side. Observation can become avoidance. Silence can turn into invisibility. Some people hide in observation to avoid risk, conflict, or vulnerability. The key difference lies in choice. Are you observing because it enriches you, or because participation feels unsafe? Only you can answer that. But if you've ever felt out of sync with a world that demands constant output, constant commentary, constant presence, you're not alone. There are many people quietly standing at the edges, noticing things others miss. And sometimes, they understand the room better than anyone else in it. So here's the question to sit with. When you think about your own life, your conversations, your relationships, your online presence, which type feels closest to you? Are you the strategist, the reflector, the protector, the contemplative, the selective participant? Or maybe you move between them depending on where you are and who you're with. If this resonated, you might want to pay attention to how often you observe and how it serves you. There's power in knowing your natural rhythm instead of forcing yourself into someone else's. And if you're curious, this channel explores these quiet patterns, the ones that don't shout but shape us deeply. Which one did you recognize in yourself?